Hi, everybody, and welcome to Random Acts of Parenting with me, Sam Straub, your owner of Teen Savvy Coaching, where I help parents of teens and tweens step into your parenting role with calm and confidence so your kids can thrive. Because as parents, we all know that when our kids are thriving, we are sailing so much smoother as a result. And one of the things that I think can get in the way during adolescence is there are often communication breakdowns. Some of these are totally normal because one of the developmental tasks of adolescents is to pull away from their families and forge connections with their peers as they're figuring out who they are and what they stand for in this world. But that doesn't mean that kids don't need their parents. And it certainly doesn't mean that parents aren't curious as to what's going on inside of their kids' heads. And so we're going to talk today about one key reason that I'm going to break down into two parts that I see communication breakdowns happening between parents and kids. And it has to do with something I call I call it being inconsistent. Some might say it's better described as being inauthentic, but I'm going to use the word consistency for the sake of what I'm going to talk about. Because I think consistency shows up in two ways in parenting, and I'm going to go over those. So I don't know if this is happening in your household, but in some adolescents, they kind of stop talking to their parents. I certainly have worked with parents who are like, my kid tells me everything and I wish they wouldn't. This is maybe like the opposite end of that spectrum, because more the norm is kids start clamming up. And when our children were little, we actually knew them better than they knew themselves, right? And as they get into, and we made choices because we knew what choices were better for them than they knew for themselves. And then adolescence happens and they start developing this inner world, this world of friendships, this world of social interactions that you are not a part of, that you weren't there when they happen. And it's natural for them to keep some of that from their parents. The the problem arises when they're trying to handle situations and circumstances around which they really do need adult guidance, but they're still keeping stuff. And in my experience, there are a couple key reasons, and they have to do with inconsistency around the reasons for which kids do so. So the first is inconsistency around rule enforcement or boundaries. And that may sound like, why would my kids stop talking to me just because I enforce rules ineffectively? But what happens in that situation is kids stop trusting your word. And so this can look like something like big, like you state an ultimatum and you don't carry through with it. And I mean, clients and students whose parents would regularly threaten to kick them out of the house. You can't live with me if you keep doing this, or pull them out of school. I worked in a private school, and the kids knew that this was not going to happen. They still felt the agitation, the disconnection from their parent, but like they knew that in a day or so, the dust would settle and the parent would, if not walk it back, actually they would never walk it back because that would mean they'd have to say, oh, the parent would have to say I'd overreacted. So they would just ignore it. The parent would pretend it never happened. And the kid would be left with, yeah, remember 2 days ago when my parent was so mad at me, they said I couldn't live in the house? And now they're acting all normal and nice and like that never happened. What do I make of that? And what kids make of that is, I can't trust my parent when they're mad, and so they therefore can't trust their parent when they're not mad, when they're not dysregulated. But this can happen on a lower level too, like like kid's disrespectful to you, and you say, any more of this, and I'm not driving you to Michael's house later. You want some of my time? You better treat me like I'm worth being around. And then a few hours go by and you're kind of like, oh, but my kid's social life is like a little bit rocky right now. And this is a friendship that he has with Michael. And I really want him to go hang out with a friend. But I told him that he was being rude to me and I wouldn't drive him. Oh, I'll just drive him this one time. And so later on, you get in the car and don't acknowledge the reason you're making a change, or it just like happens. And the kid's like not going to say, how come I'm allowed to go to Michael's? Because that they want to be able to do that. But they do register, this is an inconsistency. My parent said one thing and did another. And one of the things I help my clients do is recognize sometimes when that's happening, because sometimes we don't even realize it. So that's one type of inconsistency. And another one that I think is far more grave is the emotional inconsistency. Like when there's been a rupture in the parent-child relationship and the parent really owes the kid an apology. Maybe the kid owes a parent apology too, but it doesn't matter. We're not talking about that. We're talking about parent behavior. And the parent either doesn't offer it, or in my scenario before, like when the parent blows up and overreacts and then doesn't acknowledge it, they dust it under the rug, and the kid is still busy feeling hurt or sad or upset or confused, and the parent's just acting nice, and they're like, okay, if I take my cues from my parent, then I'm supposed to act nice now too, which teaches the child to swallow their feelings and that they can't be authentic in front of their parent, because really it should be the parent taking the lead on the I'm sorry. And I've said this to parents of my students, my clients, and sometimes my my actual parent. And when I say clients, sometimes I'm talking about, I'm a therapist, so I've had therapy clients tell me this about their relationships with their parents, and I've had students who, as a school counselor, told me this. And I've had parent coaching clients say that they've done this, and then we work on this. And that is like having a hard time giving an authentic I'm sorry. I'm sorry is a really vulnerable thing to do. And if you walk into your parenting role thinking that you have to show up from a place of like superhero status, where you've got to have a certain like mask and cape on, and you can't show your real vulnerabilities, your real authenticities, then you might be at risk for not saying I'm sorry, right? If you're putting on an act as a parent. The challenge is to be able to be strong enough, confident enough in your own self that you can acknowledge when you messed up and say that to your kids. And it doesn't sound like, hey, listen, I'm really sorry I snapped at you. I blew my top. But you really cannot lose your mind at me like that. All the kid hears is, my parent isn't really sorry. My parent is blaming me for their reaction, right? And we as parents are always in charge of our reactions. And frankly, for brain reasons, kids are not as in charge of their reactions as they're going to be when they're adults. And so we have to take the onus on the regulation of a situation. So that's another way that parents can be inconsistent, is like when there's been an emotional event in between parent and child and the parent doesn't acknowledge it. And I think that can be a big breakdown. Kids are busy feeling things, and there's lots of other reasons, but these are two major sources of inconsistency that I see in working with teens. When teens tell me, and they don't feel like they can say this to their parent, because often they have the type of parent who, if they give the parent feedback, the parent's going to explode, blow their top, or say, I'm sorry, but, and it creates another cycle. So if you know that you are working from this framework, or you have a spouse who works from this framework, and you want to like some tools for how to rewire it, how to create more authentic connections, this is some of the stuff that I do in parent coaching, not exclusively. And I'm going to end with one more small, this is like a bonus reason kids shuts down. It's not exactly in inconsistency, but sometimes kids also shut down because parents they're not good at jumping into their kids' shoes, which I've sort of explained in some of these examples of inconsistency, but I'm going to tell a story. When I was in 7th grade, I had a first boyfriend. And by boyfriend, it meant like he said to me, like, hey, will you go out with me? And I said, yes. And going out didn't mean like going on a date. It meant just like, will you be my boyfriend? Or will you be my girlfriend? And we were boyfriend and girlfriend for like 4.5 days, because that's what happens in 7th grade. But I thought I should tell my mom. at the early part of those 4.5 days. And I sat down on the floor. She was reading a book in her room, and I sat on the floor of her room and I said, "Hey, Mom, I have to tell you something." And I said his name. I said, "So and so and I are going out." And she was like, "Oh, where are you going?" And I was like, "No, no, we're not going anywhere." And she said, "Well, how are you going out? Do you need a ride?" And I was like, "Ooh, ooh," and it was getting like more and more awkward as the conversation went on. And she was not getting it. "Well, where are you going? How can you be going out somewhere if you're not going anyplace?" So I finally said, "No, Mom, we're going steady." And I had to use like I was a child of the 80s, excuse me. And I had to use a term, like coined in my mother's youth. And she's like, "Oh, you're going steady. I get it now." And that was when I decided I cannot tell my mom about dating. 7th grade, one day into a 4-day relationship. And I had other relationships in 7th grade, in middle school and high school. And I just did not tell my parents a whole lot about it because I was like, my mother doesn't get it. So she was just unable to jump into the lingo, and I shouldn't blame her, but that was a decision I made in 7th grade, and I stuck with it. So some other ways that you can kind of be there for your kid is to come at your parenting role from a place of curiosity. Ask questions when there is a place for you to, when you don't know as much, like allow your kid to be the expert. And that is also a place of true authenticity, when you can just be like, "Listen, I should know what I'm talking about here, but I don't, and I need you to like cue me in." It's all about, and that's a consistent, authentic way to show up. A little bit of a sidebar. Anyway, those are my 2 points, or 2 ways to be consistent. One is with rule enforcement, and 2 is with emotional, like demonstration of emotions. And if you want tips or tools, or you want to talk more, because there are legs to all of these, please don't hesitate to be in touch. And for those on the call, are there any questions or follow-up that you have after hearing that brief little bit, or topics you want to talk about the next time? All right. Well, then I'm going to call this a wrap. If you think of something, you can send me an email at sam@teensavvycoaching.com. And if you are like, "Hey, this is interesting," or "I want to talk more," you can set up a time to work with me as a client by reaching out at the same email, or just contacting me on any of the book a call buttons on my website. All right. Have an awesome day, everybody. And thank you for tuning in. Bye, everybody.